Tonight's story starts with a girl who never understood why she was different. A pack of wolves who could smell it on her skin before she ever spoke a word. And an alpha king who had crushed every soft thing inside himself for 7 years, until she walked into his territory and every wolf he commanded dropped to their knees. She thought she was nobody. They called her Wren, not because it was a beautiful name, because a wren is small and plain and forgettable, and that's exactly what the people in her village wanted her to be. She grew up on the outskirts of a logging town called Harrow's Edge, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and what they knew about Wren was this: she was the girl animals listened to. Not in a charming way, not in a fairy tale way. In a way that made people uncomfortable. Dogs would stop mid-bark when she walked past. Horses that threw grown men would stand still beneath her hand. Crows followed her to the market and sat on the roof until she came back out. She never trained them, never called them. They just came. And instead of marveling at it, the town mocked her for it. The children threw stones. The mothers pulled their kids closer when she passed. The men laughed at her father, said he'd bred something strange, something not quite right. Her father never defended her, not once. He just drank, and when he drank enough, he'd look at her with something worse than cruelty in his eyes, something like recognition, like he knew what she was and hated himself for making it. Wren learned early that the safest thing to be was invisible, so she made herself small, quiet, useful. She took work mending fences at the forest's edge, jobs no one else wanted because the timberline was where the wolves began. The wolves never bothered her. Not once. She didn't think about why. She came to mend a fence. She had no idea the wolves had been waiting for her since before she was born. The morning it happened, Wren was stitching wire along the northern fence line, the one that ran closest to the Blackridge timberline. It was early. Frost still clung to the grass. Her fingers were numb, but she worked anyway, the way she always did, without complaint, without company. She heard the snap before she saw anything. Not a twig, bone. Something large had broken something alive, deep in the tree line, and the sound carried through the frozen air like a crack in glass. Wren stopped, held the wire still, listened. Then the wolves came out. Not one, not 3, dozens. They emerged from the trees in a slow, deliberate wave, gray and black and white, breath steaming in the cold air, moving in a formation she had never seen animals hold. They weren't hunting. They weren't fleeing. They were walking with purpose, as though summoned by something she couldn't hear. And every single one of them was looking at her. Wren didn't run. She didn't scream. She set the wire down slowly, the way you lower your hands when someone is pointing something at you, and she stood there, knees locked, heart slamming against her ribs. The first wolf reached her, a massive gray female with scars across her muzzle. It stopped 3 feet from Wren's boots, held her gaze for a long, terrible second. Then it lowered its head to the ground. Not crouching, not cowering. Bowing. The second wolf did the same. Then the third. Then every wolf behind them, row after row, lowering their heads to the frost-hardened earth, until the entire tree line was filled with wolves pressing their skulls toward the dirt at her feet. Wren couldn't breathe. She counted them without meaning to. Her mind did it automatically, the way it always cataloged things she couldn't explain. 47 wolves, every one of them bowing. She took a step back. They didn't move. She took another. Still they held, not watching her leave, waiting, like they had done this before, like they had practiced. Like they had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment. Wren turned and walked back toward the village. She did not run. Something in her, something older than fear, older than logic, told her that running would be wrong. Not dangerous. Wrong, like leaving a room before someone finished speaking. She didn't tell anyone what happened. Not because she thought they wouldn't believe her. They wouldn't, but that wasn't the reason. She didn't tell anyone because somewhere inside her chest, in a place she had never been able to name, something had shifted. Like a lock turning. Like a door she didn't know existed had opened 1 inch, and through the gap she could feel warm air from a room she had never entered. She went home. She sat on the edge of her cot. She pressed her hands flat against her knees and stared at the wall. The crows were on the roof again. She could hear them settling. The next morning, they came to the village. Not the wolves, something worse. 3 men on horseback, armored in black leather with a sigil Wren had never seen. A silver wolf's jaw open, set against a dark crest. They rode through Harrow's Edge without stopping, without asking directions, without speaking to anyone. They rode straight to her father's house. Wren was behind the woodshed when she heard the knock. She came around the corner and saw her father standing in the doorway, smaller than she had ever seen him, his shoulders caved in like a man who had been expecting this visit for 20 years. The tallest of the 3 spoke. His voice was flat, clipped, military. "The girl, Wren, she's been summoned." Her father didn't ask by whom. He didn't ask why. He turned, looked at her standing by the woodpile with an axe in her hand, and his face did something she had never seen it do before. It crumbled. Not anger, not drunken spite. Grief, raw and clean and decades old, like he had been holding it behind his teeth since the day she was born. "Go with them," he said. Wren didn't move. "Duh. Go with them, Wren." She looked at the 3 riders. Their horses were perfectly still, not shifting, not stamping. Still the way animals were only still around her. She set the axe down. She saved them the trouble of explaining. "Where?" The tall one glanced at the other 2. Something passed between them, not words, something faster, a recognition. Blackridge Hold, the seat of the Alpha King. Wren had heard of Blackridge. Everyone in the timber towns had. It was the fortress beyond the tree line, the place where the wolf packs were governed, where the shifters held their territory and their laws. Humans didn't go there. Humans weren't invited. "Why does he want me?" The tall rider looked at her, and for the first time his expression shifted. Not softness, something closer to reverence, held tightly behind training and discipline. "He didn't send us," the rider said. Wren frowned. "The wolves did." She climbed onto the horse they offered without waiting for a hand up. She didn't look back at her father. She didn't look back at the village. She carried nothing but the coat on her back and the questions multiplying in her chest like a heartbeat she couldn't slow down. The riders said nothing for the entire journey. But their horses, massive war horses trained for combat, kept turning their heads to look at her. And when the trees closed in around them, and the first howl rose from somewhere deep in the Blackridge territory, all 3 riders tensed in their saddles. Wren didn't. She closed her eyes, and for reasons she couldn't explain, the sound felt like someone calling her name in a language she had always known but never spoken. Cale heard her before he saw her. Not her voice, not her footsteps. He heard the silence she brought with her, the way the entire western corridor of Blackridge Hold went quiet the moment she passed through the outer gate. The kind of silence that only falls when every wolf in range has stopped what they are doing to pay attention to the same thing at the same time. He was in the war room, upper floor, east-facing window. Maps spread across the stone table, border reports from 3 territories weighed down with iron markers. His beta Tauren was mid-sentence, something about a disputed hunting line along the southern ridge when Cale's hands stopped moving. His fingers were on the map. They stayed there. But the rest of him, every sense, every instinct, every part of the thing inside him that was not fully human, turned toward the window like a compass finding north. "Continue," he said. Tauren continued. Cale heard none of it. He crossed to the window in 3 strides. He didn't rush. His body never rushed. 7 years of ruling Blackridge had taught him to move like the walls themselves, deliberate, unhurried, impossible to shift. But his jaw was tight. His pulse, which hadn't risen above resting in 6 years, had climbed in the space between one breath and the next. Below, in the courtyard, the riders had stopped. And a girl was climbing down from the horse. She was small, not fragile, small the way a blade is small, compact, efficient. She wore a woodcutter's coat too large for her frame and boots that had seen 3 winters past their usefulness. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a way that suggested she had done it without a mirror, without caring. She landed on the cobblestones and didn't look up. That was the first thing he noticed. Every human who had ever entered Blackridge looked up. They looked up at the walls, at the towers, at the sky framed between the parapets. They looked up because the fortress was designed to make you feel the weight of where you were. She didn't look up. She looked straight ahead, measured the courtyard with her eyes the way a person counts exits. Then she adjusted the collar of her coat and walked forward. The wolves began immediately. It started at the gate. 2 sentries in shifted form, large males, battle-scarred, answering to no one below Cale himself, lowered their heads as she passed between them. Not a dip. A full bow, muzzles to the stone, the way they only bowed when Cale entered the courtyard after a long absence. The way they bowed to him. She didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't react. She kept walking. 3 more wolves along the inner wall. They turned their bodies toward her as she approached, tracking her without moving their heads, the way wolves track something they recognize but have never seen. Then, one by one, they lowered. Cale's hand was on the window frame. His knuckles were white. Torin had stopped talking. He was standing behind Cale now, looking over his shoulder at the courtyard below. "That's her," Torin asked. Cale didn't answer. The riders said the pack beyond the timber line found her first. 47 wolves bowed at the fence line. The sentries confirmed it independently. The response was, "I can see what the response is." Torin went quiet. Below, Wren had reached the center of the courtyard. She had stopped, not because anyone told her to, but because she had run out of direction. No one had come to meet her. No one had told her where to go. She stood in the open space between the stables and the great hall, surrounded by wolves who had flattened themselves to the ground around her in a widening circle, and she looked, for the first time, uncertain. Not afraid, uncertain, like someone standing in the middle of a sentence they hadn't started and didn't know how to finish. Cale watched her hands. They were at her sides, fingers slightly open, not clenched, not reaching, just open the way you hold your hands when you don't know what they're for yet. Something behind his ribs cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way ice cracks in spring, not shattering, just shifting, making room for something underneath that had been held down too long. He stepped back from the window. "Send Marin to meet her," he said. His voice was level. His voice was always level. "Quarter her in the east wing, the room with the desk." "The room adjacent to." "I know what it's adjacent to." Torin looked at him. Torin had known Cale since they were 12, had watched him take the throne at 21 after his father's death, had watched him build Blackridge into the strongest hold in 4 territories, had watched him bury every feeling that didn't serve the pack until the man standing in front of him was more structure than person. Torin had not seen Cale's hands shake in 7 years. They were shaking now. "Cale." The room with the desk, Torin. Torin left. Cale stood alone in the war room. The maps were still spread across the table. The iron markers hadn't moved. The border dispute was still unresolved. The world was still exactly what it had been 4 minutes ago. But he could feel her. Not her proximity, not her scent, though that was there too, faint, carried on cold air through stone, something like pine resin and rain-wet earth. He could feel her the way you feel the weather change before it changes. A pressure shift, a new gravity. 7 years ago, he had felt something like this. He had named it. He had trusted it. It had nearly destroyed him. He placed both hands flat on the table. He pressed down until the shaking stopped. He breathed once, slowly, through his nose. Then he picked up the border report and began reading from the place Torin had left off. He did not go to the window again. But he did not move away from it either. Marin was a tall woman with a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. She didn't explain it. She didn't explain much. She showed Wren to the east wing, pointed to the room, stone walls, a narrow bed, a desk pushed beneath a window that overlooked the inner courtyard, and said 3 words. "Meals are downstairs." Then she left. Wren stood in the room alone. She set her coat on the bed. She looked at the desk. It was old, heavy oak, scarred with use, and on it sat a leather-bound folio thick enough to be mistaken for a doorstop. She opened it. The pages were handwritten, dense, ancient script, not quite old tongue, not quite the common trade language of the timber towns. Something in between, a dialect she had seen fragments of in her mother's books before her mother had disappeared when Wren was 6. She sat down without deciding to sit. Her fingers moved across the first page. The ink was faded but legible. She began to read slowly at first, translating in her head, then faster as the grammar unlocked itself beneath her hands like a door she had opened before in a dream. It was a record, a history of the wolf packs, their laws, their bloodlines, their bonds. Pages and pages detailing how the packs chose their leaders, how territories were drawn, how disputes were settled. Practical, clinical, the bureaucracy of wolves. But threaded through the record, like a vein of gold in ordinary rock, was something else. A prophecy. Not announced as one, not set apart in ornate script or bordered with symbols. It was embedded in the text, as though the writer considered it fact rather than prediction, woven into the history like it had already happened, and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Wren translated the passage 3 times to make sure she had it right. The bond chooses before the mind knows. She will walk among them carrying the old scent, and they will know her before she knows herself. The wolves will lower because the blood remembers what the girl has forgotten. And the king who has sealed himself shut will feel the seal crack, not from force, but from recognition. Wren read it again. Then she closed the folio, placed both hands flat on the desk, stared at the wall. She did not write it in her notes. She didn't know why. He came on the second evening. No knock. The door was open. Wren had left it open because the room held heat poorly, and the corridor draft kept the air moving. She was bent over the folio, a candle burning low beside her, her notes spread in a careful grid across the desk. She heard him before she saw him. Not his footsteps. He moved like something that had learned to carry its weight without sound. She heard the silence change. The way the corridor went still when he entered it, the way even the draft seemed to hold its breath. She did not turn around. "The third section is damaged," she said, her pen still moving. "Water, not fire. The ink bled, but the structure underneath is intact. I'll need another day beyond what you've given me." Silence. Then his voice, low, controlled, the kind of voice that had been used to give orders so long it had forgotten how to ask questions. "You can read it." It wasn't a question. "I can read most of it." She turned a page. "The dialect is a variant I've seen in coastal records. My mother had books in the same family. The grammar shifts in the second section. Someone else took over the writing. Different hand, different era, same tradition." She still had not turned around. Cale stood in the doorway. He filled it not because he was performing, but because he was built the way the fortress was built. Broad, deliberate, made of materials that didn't bend. His arms were crossed. His face showed nothing. But his eyes were on the back of her neck, on the place where her hair had fallen loose from its tie, and he hadn't blinked in 30 seconds. "How long do you need?" he asked. 4 days, possibly 5. "You were given 3. Then you'll get an incomplete translation, or you can give me 5 and get it right." She said it the way she said everything, without looking up, without emphasis, without any indication that she was speaking to the most powerful wolf in 4 territories. She wasn't being defiant. She wasn't performing disrespect. She was simply not oriented around him. And it undid him more than defiance ever could. 5 days, he said. Then he left. Wren's pen stopped. She turned her head toward the doorway. The corridor was empty. The draft had resumed. The candlelight flickered once and steadied. She looked at the space where he had been standing. The stone floor, the threshold, the absence of him which somehow felt heavier than his presence. She turned back to the folio. Her hand was trembling. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, clinically, from a distance, cataloging data she didn't yet have a framework for. She pressed her fingers flat against the page until the trembling stopped. Then she read the next passage. He will not come to her as a king. He will come as a man standing in a doorway, unable to cross it. And she will not turn to face him, not from pride, but because some part of her already knows that when she does, everything ordinary about her life will end. Wren stared at the words. She read them once more. Then she turned the page and kept working. But her hand didn't stop shaking for an hour. The summons came on the third morning. Wren was mid-translation, her notes spread in careful rows across the desk, when Marin appeared in the doorway. No knock, no greeting, just 3 words delivered like a military dispatch. Council chamber, now. Wren set down her pen. She didn't ask why. She had learned in 3 days that Blackridge Hold operated on information economy. You received exactly what you needed and nothing more. Questions were not refused. They were simply not answered. She followed Marin through corridors she hadn't walked before, deeper into the fortress. The stone grew older here, darker, the kind of walls that had witnessed centuries and remembered all of it. Torches burned in iron brackets. Shadows moved. The council chamber was circular. High ceilings. A long stone table curved like a crescent moon, and behind it sat 7 wolves in human form, 4 men, 3 women, all of them old enough to carry authority in their posture and hard enough to have earned it. A single chair had been placed 6 feet from the table. Not at the table, in front of it. Isolation and judgment. The staging told her everything before anyone spoke. Wren walked to the chair. She did not sit. She counted the room instead, 7 council members, 2 guards at the door, Marin standing 3 paces to her left. No Kale. She filed that. The man at the center of the table spoke first. Gray-haired, sharp-featured, the kind of face that had been handsome once and had traded beauty for authority somewhere along the way. You are the human called Wren. I am. You were brought here 3 days ago by riders of this hold. I was. And in those 3 days, you have caused a disruption unprecedented in the history of this council. Wren said nothing. She had learned that silence was its own kind of power. It forced the other person to keep talking, to reveal more than they intended. The gray-haired man leaned forward. 112 wolves have registered a bond response since your arrival. The sentries at the gate. The patrol units in the eastern corridor. Wolves who have never bowed to anyone below the alpha himself have pressed their heads to the ground at the sight of you. He let the number hang in the air. It has not happened in 14 years. The last time, it was because a new king had arrived. Wren felt the weight of that. 112. She had seen perhaps 30 bow in her presence. The rest had happened beyond her sight, beyond her knowing, wolves responding to something she carried without understanding what it was. This is not normal, the gray-haired man continued. This is not acceptable. You are human. You carry no bloodline we recognize. You have no standing in this hold, no claim to territory, no bond that has been formally acknowledged. A woman to his left, silver hair, pale eyes, a mouth that looked like it had never smiled, spoke next. The council has reviewed the situation. Our recommendation is removal, immediate transport beyond the timberline, a formal severance of whatever connection has been. What does the king say? The words left Wren's mouth before she decided to speak them. The chamber went silent. The gray-haired man's jaw tightened. The silver-haired woman's hands stilled on the table. Every council member was looking at Wren now, not with anger, but with something closer to recalculation, like she had just moved a piece on a board they thought they controlled. Wren didn't argue her case. She redirected. You're 7 council members, 2 guards, 1 escort. She glanced at Marin. But the alpha isn't here, which means either he doesn't know about this summons, unlikely, given how this hold operates, or he knows and chose not to attend, which means he's already decided, and you're hopping to move faster than his decision. The gray-haired man's face went flat. You overstep. I'm asking a question. What does the king say? The door behind her opened. Wren didn't turn. She didn't need to. The silence changed, the same silence she had felt in her room, in the corridor, every time he entered a space she occupied. The air itself seemed to hold still. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. He crossed the chamber and stopped 3 feet to her right. She felt his presence like heat from a fire, not touching her, but close enough to warm the air between them. The translator stays. 5 words, no justification. The gray-haired man opened his mouth. Cale looked at him. He closed it. The silver-haired woman tried. The council's concerns are legitimate, the disruption to the pack structure. Will be managed. Cale's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The translator remains until her work is complete. Any further discussion on the matter will go through me directly. Silence. Wren watched the council. Watched them weigh options and find none. Watched 7 people who had held power in this hold for decades fold like paper before a single sentence spoken without heat or threat. 0 violence, total authority. Cale turned and walked toward the door. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. But as he passed, close enough that she could have touched his arm, he spoke, quietly, only for her. Finish the translation. Then he was gone. Marin appeared at Wren's elbow. Back to your room. Wren followed. But her mind stayed in the chamber, on the chair placed 6 feet from the table, on the number 112, on the way he had walked in without being summoned and spoken without being asked, on the way he had said the translator stays like it was the simplest thing in the world. Like there had never been another option. He found her in the corridor after midnight. She was walking back to her room from the library, a detour she took most nights, searching for older texts that might help her decode the damaged sections. Her candle cast moving shadows on the stone walls. She didn't hear him approach. She wouldn't have heard him if she'd been listening. You didn't tell them about the manuscript. Wren stopped. She turned. Cale stood in the corridor behind her, his shoulders broad enough to block the torch light. He was still in the clothes he'd worn in the council chamber, dark wool, unmarked by insignia or ornament. In the candlelight, he looked less like a king and more like something carved from the fortress itself. Because I don't know yet what it means, Wren said. I think you do. She held his gaze. She had learned in 5 days that this was the only currency that mattered between them, direct attention. No performance, no deflection, just the truth of what she saw and what she wanted seen. I think you're afraid, she said quietly, of what I'll find in the 3rd section. Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. Finish the work, he said. Then he was gone. She worked through the night. The damaged 3rd section had been sealed in wax paper, a crude preservation attempt made centuries ago. The ink had bled, but the underlying script remained legible if you read it at the right angle, using the texture of the page rather than sight alone. Her fingers learned the letters. Her mind learned the language. And at 3 hours past midnight, with the fire rebuilt twice and bread from her satchel eaten without tasting it, her back screaming and her eyes burning, she found the passage. It was dated, marked with a name not the original scribe but a later hand, someone who had added to the record centuries after it was begun. And the passage was written not in the formal dialect of the rest of the manuscript, but in something rawer, more urgent. The mate comes when the blood calls. She will not know what she is until she stands inside the walls. And when she knows, when the moment of recognition comes, the king must speak her name before the pack. He must say aloud what every wolf already understands. He must name her in front of witnesses, bind her not through fate but through choice. Because a bond without nomming hollows you out, both of you. It eats from the inside. The body knows its mate. But if the mind refuses to speak it, the soul tears itself apart trying to close the gap. Wren read it 3 times. Then she read it again. Her hands were shaking, not from cold, not from exhaustion, from the weight of understanding that had just settled across her shoulders like a cloak she hadn't asked for. She didn't write it in her notes. Her body knew not to. She found him in the courtyard at dawn. Not waiting, he was never the type to wait passively. He was moving stone. There was a wall being repaired on the eastern side, and he was there with mortar and rubble, his hands dirty, his face smudged with dust. Not performing, working. The most vulnerable she had ever seen him. She sat beside him, not across from him. Spatial choice that signaled equality, not interrogation. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The morning light was flat and cold. Like it had been there forever, she thought. Like the permanence of what was about to be decided was already written into the air. "What are you afraid of?" she asked. He didn't stop working. His hands kept moving, placing stone, smoothing mortar, building something that would last longer than either of them. "That it won't be enough," he said finally. "That you'll stay for a season and then understand what it means to be bound to a wolf pack, what it costs, and you'll decide the cost is too high. That's not a reason not to try." "No," he set down the trowel, "it's just a fear." He didn't pretend it wasn't real. He named it accurately. And she didn't dismiss it. She reframed it with a clarity that made the fear seem smaller without making it disappear. "I know what the manuscript says," she told him. "The part in the third section, about the nomming." He went still. "I know you've been waiting. I know what every wolf in this hold feels when I'm in the same room as them. I know the bond exists whether we speak it or not." She turned to look at him directly. "But I want to know what you want, not the pack, not the prophecy, not the manuscript written centuries before I was born." She paused. Do you want this?" He looked at her, really looked at her. The way he'd looked at her from the window that first day, like she was something he'd been hunting for so long he'd forgotten what he was hunting for until he saw it. "You're my mate." 3 words, no ornament, the way he said everything like it had been weighed before it was spoken. Like he had carried this truth so long that it had become part of his skeleton. "I've known since you walked through the gate, since before that maybe, since the day you were born and every wolf in 4 territories felt the absence of you." He picked up the trowel again. "But I spent 7 years learning not to feel anything, and nomming you means feeling everything. It means trusting that you'll stay when the bond becomes real, when you understand what I am and what I need from you. And if I stay, then I stop being afraid of losing you and start being afraid that I'm not enough to keep you." "That's not the same fear," Ren said. "No, it's worse." She took his hand. His palm was rough, warm, real. "Then we're both afraid," she said, "and we both choose anyway." The Friday nomming came 3 days later. The courtyard was full beyond capacity. The pack had gathered, wolves in human form, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air, waiting for something they'd known was coming since the moment she walked through the gate. Frost lay on the stone. As Kale moved toward her, stepping asterisk around the table, not summoning her to him, the frost began to melt. Slow, deliberate, like something that knew what it was doing. He stood before her, and the room held its breath. "Do you want this?" she asked him one final time. "Not because the manuscript says it's real, not because the pack already feels it. Do you want this?" "I want you," he said. "In every way it's possible to want, I choose you." And as he spoke her name, Ren, before the entire pack, a slow release moved through 30 people simultaneously, like a tide going out. Outside in the courtyard, the wolves went back to their work. The frost on the stone began to melt. The days after the nomming were quiet in a way Ren hadn't expected. She had braced for ceremony, for ritual, for the weight of what had happened to press down on her until she couldn't breathe. But instead, life at Blackridge Hold simply continued. Wolves trained in the courtyard. Meals were served in the Great Hall. Reports came in from the border territories and were reviewed and filed. The only difference was that now, when she walked through the corridors, no one bowed. They nodded. They met her eyes. They spoke to her directly, not with deference, but with the easy familiarity of people who had accepted her presence as permanent. She was no longer a mystery to be solved or a disruption to be managed. She was Pack. Kale had explained it the night after the nomming, lying beside her in the dark of his chambers. Their chambers now. though she still kept her desk in the East Wing room where this had all begun. "The bowing was recognition," he said. "The wolves knew what you were before you did, but recognition isn't relationship. It's just seeing. Now that I've named you, the bond is anchored. You're not a question anymore, you're an answer." Wren had turned that over in her mind for days. An answer. She had spent her whole life being a question, the girl who didn't fit, the child animals obeyed for reasons no one could explain, the daughter her father couldn't look at without grief bleeding through his eyes. She had carried the weight of her own unknowability like a stone in her chest. And now, in this fortress full of wolves, she had become something legible, something that made sense. Not because she had changed, because she had finally found the language that could name her. The manuscript was finished on the 7th day. Wren placed the final translation on Cale's desk. A clean copy, every passage rendered into common script, every damaged section reconstructed from context and careful study. It was the most complete record of pack law and prophecy that had existed in centuries. Scholars would study it for generations. Cale read the last page, set it down, looked at her. "You translated the part about the hollowing," he said. "I did. You didn't include it in the official record." "No." He waited. "Some truths aren't for scholars," Wren said. "Some truths are just for the people who need them. You needed to know what would happen if you didn't name me. You needed to understand the cost of silence. But the rest of the world doesn't need to know how close you came to choosing it." Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he crossed the room, took her face in his hands, kissed her forehead with a gentleness that undid something in her chest she hadn't known was still holding. "You see too much," he said against her skin. "You chose me anyway. I chose you because of it." The message from Harrow's Edge arrived 2 weeks later. Her father was dead. Fever, the letter said, quick. He hadn't suffered. Wren read the words and felt nothing, then everything. Then nothing again, cycling through grief and relief and guilt and something she couldn't name that lived beneath all of it. Cale found her in the East Wing room, sitting at her desk, the letter open in front of her. He didn't speak. He simply sat beside her, the way she had sat beside him in the courtyard that morning, choosing proximity over interrogation. "He knew," Wren said finally. "My whole life. He knew what I was. That's why he couldn't look at me. That's why he drank. He was waiting for this, for them to come and take me to where I belonged." "Does that make it better or worse?" "I don't know," she folded the letter. "Both, neither, it makes it true." Cale took her hand, held it. "You don't have to forgive him," he said. "You don't have to hate him either. You just have to let him be what he was, a man who knew something he couldn't carry and broke under the weight of it." Wren looked at him. "Is that what you were, before?" "Yes." He didn't flinch from it. "I knew what I felt. I knew what the bond meant. And I spent 7 years trying to outrun it because the last time I named someone, she left. And I thought if I never named anyone again, I'd never have to feel that loss." "What changed?" "You walked through my gate." He smiled, small, rare, real. "And every wolf in 4 territories told me what I already knew. That running was over. That you were home." Outside, the courtyard was full of wolves. Not gathered for ceremony, just living. Training, talking, carrying supplies, repairing walls. The ordinary work of a pack that had found its center and no longer needed to search. Wren stood at the window of the East Wing room. Her room, still, even though she slept in Cale's chambers now. She watched the wolves move below. Watched the way they inhabited the space with ease, with purpose, with the quiet confidence of creatures who knew exactly where they belonged. She had spent 23 years not knowing what she was. Now she knew. And the knowing didn't make her smaller. It made her more herself than she had ever been. "I need to know what you thought of Wren, because she's not like the others we've had here." She didn't beg for answers. She didn't wait to be rescued. She walked into a world that should have terrified her, translated her own destiny with her bare hands, and demanded that a king speak his truth out loud before she'd let him claim her. Drop in the comments, Team Wren, or did Cale steal it for you? I want to know. And if this one stayed with you, if you felt that moment when he finally said her name, share it with someone who needs a love story that earns its ending. It helps more than you know.